in my hand the very last edition of Time magazine. It carries a photograph on the cover of many people, clearly parents and their children. One handsome father right at the front is carrying his 3-year-old child on his shoulder, and she's eating an apple as they go. All of them walking through long grass, heads down, hoping to find their promised land. The photograph shows everyone apart from that father walking with heads down, remembering perhaps the places they've left behind, fearing what places may be ahead. Refugees in an unimaginable existence, and with little consolation coming to them that they just happen to be part of that vast family of displaced persons, 60 million worldwide. They have no suitcases, just a plastic bag here and there, no change of clothes. And they all look fine people. How can they avoid being depressed about their world, about their future? Is it any wonder that they walk with their heads down, eyes on the ground, their only security, the earth beneath their feet? Yet I suspect that most of these people, down to the smallest child, will one day tell their story, as I've heard many such stories, how they took hold of their life, even when they had so little to take hold of, and they made something of it. How they rose above their resentments and their anger, understandable as all that may be, and helped their children and helped each other explore the wide boundaries of courage and hope. Some people get depressed, and like King Saul of the Old Testament, can be lifted out of their depression by hearing some music. But others find their depression settles in for the long haul and is not coaxed by music or by the comedian or by the day at the races or the night out dancing, none of that. Why are some so affected, as if they have a terrible disease, and others are much more reactive and are able to say quite quickly, I'm over it, I'm okay. Whenever I see a person struggling with their depression, and I see them discover a few tiny seeds of inspiration and hope, I'm amazed. I'm amazed that such possibilities walk around all of us every day. Whenever I see a person loaded with different ingredients of their depression, and their eyes are down, and I don't see any care or love around them, but just a word. They're just a word away from care and love. But they cannot see it or hear it. How can we help them avoid the different kinds of depression that so often dress to look like something else? In my professional practice, there are at least 9, maybe 10 or 12, but certainly 9 different kinds of depression. Each one of those depressions has its peculiarities. Sometimes it's concealed expression. And we hear a lot of people talking about depression on the radio, on the television, even talking about the epidemic of depression. And in a necessary and right search for treatment, we're sometimes led to believe that that there's only one kind of treatment for depression, when in fact there are 9 or many more kinds of depression that may not yield to that one kind of treatment. So here in this address, I'm not going to be talking about the treatment side of things, but really about the much more difficult and frequently more elusive concern of how to prevent depression, how to avoid depression. Sometimes we get so focused on the need for treatment that we don't pause to see how the treatment itself puts in place certain things that are missing in our life. And if we had them in our life in the first place, maybe that depression would have been different. We often hear it said that if the parent was depressed, it is not surprising that the child will be depressed. The fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are on edge. But that need not happen. If the person has a depressed kind of a way of approaching life stresses, they could be vulnerable to depression. But that needn't happen. Accepting these various riders, how can we take steps to avoid depression, which can creep up on us, any one of us? Now, of course, we hear several politicians from time to time say that they're depressed, so that they're going to give up politics and spend more time with their family. I hope their family will welcome them. But I hear other people saying, I'm going to give up my family and spend more time in politics. Of course, I'm being funny, or trying to be. What I want to say is how important it is that as I talk about this issue of depression, we need to see that theology and therapy are companions in this issue. Often we hear people talking about depression as if there's only one way, only one discipline, only one thing. But the different disciplines can sometimes be a more comprehensive way of coping with our depressions, and certainly in avoiding them. Now, over the next year, say, most of us will go to our doctor. And if he or she follows the guidelines for all primary care physicians, they will ask you several questions about how you're coping with your life, how you have been coping over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Do you have times when you feel down, worn out, depressed? Do you frequently feel you've lost interest in life and in the pleasure of doing things? Do you value close relationships? Or are you too often angry and moody in those relationships? Are you overeating, under-exercised? Do you too often feel bad about yourself, low in self-criticism, high in self-criticism, low in self-confidence, high in self-confidence, low in self-esteem, high in self-esteem? Where are you in these things? Looking at the person in general, he or she, every one of us, what do we need to avoid depression? I'm going to name 7 possibilities. Though if we look at the everyone in a wider context, I could name many more and you can add to mine. So put aside all the diagnostic questions, the things that might be wrong with us, and ask the question, well, what do we need? First of all, we need an inner sense of harmony in ourselves. That in spite of all the nasty things in the world and the nasty things in our lives, we need a focus on finding the best harmony. A harmony that gets free of all that aggravating anger that clusters around us. A harmony that rises above the disappointments and the resentments that life and God may have landed upon you. A harmony that accepts what is and looks for the strength to find the self that you can yet become. Harmony. Some people become depressed and they say, well, that's because life let me down. That's because people let me down. That's because my parents let me down. That's because God let me down. When they most needed someone, nobody was there. Life itself delivered that unkindest cut of all, and there was no softener for those sharp blows of life. So what do we need? First of all, I've mentioned the need to re-establish our harmony. Second, we can become depressed when we let the stresses of life accumulate. They become the toxins in our bowl. Remember the Old Testament reading I took? Man of God, there's poison in the pot, he said. Man of God, there is death in the pot. That can happen in our life. Certain things can get in and the toxins can take over. And we know that there's poison around us. We let these things get out of control. We do need to have something to neutralize the toxins. A balanced strength of self. See, the prophet in the Old Testament story, he kept his head. He kept his view of things. He knew what was needed. We need to learn ways to use that strength of self to cope with our stresses. A strong sense of self, even when it's under stress. Sometimes we go under because the stresses are too many in number, or they're too fearsome in their strength. So we blame the stresses, or we blame the people who put in the stresses on us. When in point of fact, what we really need to avoid depression is to redevelop the strength in ourself. Strength of self. Number 3, we need to identify those things that make us feel good about ourselves. Actually make us feel good. That will boost our self-worth. That will keep our engines running even when we think we've run out of gas. That will lift our mood, you see. It's a mood issue we're talking about after all. A mood issue. So a couple of years ago, as many of you know, I began several mood clinics to help people identify their moods, understand their moods, and learn how to intercept their troubled moods and turn those moods and the behaviours that went with them onto a more positive course. Now, you ought not to be surprised when I tell you that many people had very little understanding of their own moods and the behaviours that went with them. And so they simply accepted the fact that they are a moody person, or that their mother or their father had been a moody person, and the mood was there. In fact, even amongst trained professionals, there was a strong acceptance that moods were something that just happened to us, and there was a low level of commitment to the belief that moods could be controlled. Rather than being subordinated to our moods and all the behaviours that go with them, we could do something to change the way those moods affected us and change the level of those moods. Mood states were often well established in my mood clinics. People had been walking with these moods on and off for years, learned since early childhood. And any change that was being suggested was resisted, strangely enough. Not only resisted, but resented. All too often, Our tendency is to attack those whom we feel are feeding us the toxins of life. We need several streams of self-energy to keep our self-tank functioning well, to keep our mood states up and running. Well, to do this, it may be helpful to invoke some parts of what I've called my F paradigm. Now, those of you who come here regularly have heard me speak about the F paradigm. There are 40 Fs in the paradigm, but I'm going to talk about just a couple today, just two of them. Number one, we need to learn how to fence off those feelings and behaviour that are waiting to join the chorus of depression. Fence off your anger. Fence off the sludge of your negative memories. Fence off the fears of failure. Learn to repair your fences regularly so that the fences are effective in keeping certain things over there and not invading our life here. Repair your fences. F for fence. Fence. The other F today, I've mentioned this one before, keep alive your positive fantasy of the future. You see, if you have no fantasy of the future, of course you're vulnerable to be depressed. You've drawn the blinds. You're not looking for a future. The future looks horrific. Check your fantasy of the future, the good fantasy of the future. Check it for reality. Check it that it sits well with other people that are around you. If you are not clear about your fantasy of the future, then don't be surprised that in the muddled state that often goes with that uncertainty, the muddled state that gathers together jealousy and conflict and lost priorities, you become vulnerable to depression. Yes, as we get older, we start to think, well, what is the good of talking about a fantasy of the future? There won't be much future. Well, you're talking about future in terms of length, time, the time element. Supposing you talk about the fantasy of the future in terms of its content. The fantasy then is not only about how long it will be, but about the enrichment that you can put into the pot. Fantasy enriching the fantasy of the future, neutralizing the negatives, enriching the positives. And what am I up to? I'm up to number 5. We need to cultivate effective support people. Support people, or if you don't have a support person, a supportive influence, supportive experience that sustains your self-worth, that sustains your courage to be, that sustains your belief in living a worthwhile life. Supportive influences. In the Big Tent program that I conduct for kindergarten, the staff of the kindergartens, we've been spending some time just in recent weeks on identifying depression in kindergarten children, 4.5 years of age. Why would little kids get depressed? I can tell you 10 different reasons why little kids of 4 get depressed. We need to also ask, how much does that early childhood experience of depression get so absorbed that it then becomes part of the growth pattern into our adult years? So the adult behaviour reflects, as it were, the depression that has remained all that time. What do children need to avoid depression? They need emotionally healthy parents. Parents have reached a quiet settlement with their own conflicts, discontent, and disruptions. They need a good sense of self to meet their different situation. They need positive emotions, positive moods, just like us, adults. They need a capacity to turn their negatives around into positives. They need an enjoyable, stable relationship. They need to be taught the laws of likability. And that's what we've been doing in the kindergarten in the Big Tent group. So I come to number 6 of my address today. We need to find ways to release the healing in our brain. Dr. Norman Doidge has written 2 major books, and his most recent one is called The Brain's Way of Healing. Norman Doidge is a psychoanalyst from Canada, and he emphasizes something that every treating doctor of depression might ponder. He says, people are not passive objects on which depression plays havoc, but each person can be encouraged to be more active in their self-management. Rather than fall into the false despair of the depression people, rather we take a more intelligent and active role in the maintenance of our health and in the construction of platforms of enjoyment in our lives. How can we release the healing powers of our brain? By having a valued therapeutic talker, for a start. A talker who actually believes in the healing power of the brain, in the healing power of our relationship, in the healing power of our environments. That would be a good start. By being open to understand the power of paint and poetry, the power of symbols and statues and sculptures, the power of symphonies and stories and songs. Yes, I purposely use the alliteration so that you might remember the power of paint and poetry, the power of symbols and statues and sculpture, the power of symphonies and stories and songs are all part of the healing powers of the brain. By integrating good mind images and emotions into our bodies so that the damaging images of emotions of the past can be neutralized. Man of God, he said, there is poison in this pot. We want to neutralize the poison and put something good. So he brought some different grain and threw it into the pot and neutralized the pot, and it then became something that was nourishing and good to eat. I come to number 7. Number 7. Often the person in a depressed state has lost contact with the comforts and soothers and stimulations of life. And in a driven way, they will try to find those comforts, soothers and stimulants far into the extreme places of life, where destructiveness and dying can be also quickly present. So that drivenness demands that they will take over. The drivenness takes over our life and our living. What do we need most at those times? Some would say we need to re-find the lost mother, or someone that feels like a good, reliable, non-judgmental mother. Dr. Doidge again, where is he? In the book, he wrote that some people find that in music. And he pointed particularly to the music of Mozart. He said it seemed like Mozart was somehow the music, gave us music for everybody. And it had the effect of recharging, stimulating, relaxing, and calming the mind. Mozart, he said, gave rhythms and melodies and flow, and that is why Mozart is such a good mother. Because the mother's voice does the same, he said. Sadly, the mother's voice can become a painful voice. But the music of Mozart can transcend that painful voice, and it can reach into the heart and mind that nothing else can touch. It is one of those in-depth great mysteries of medicine and healing. We can avoid depression by being in touch with the moods and melodies, the elevation and expansiveness of the symbolic Good Mother, discovered again and again in music. In our growing up and in events of our life, we experience times that we fall apart. To avoid waiting too long in that falling apart experience, we need to be put back together again. Good talking therapy helps to bring together the bits and pieces, the broken bits, the bruises, the slow bleeding. We need that vital work of being joined together again, bringing things together again, our broken bits, to keep the nutrients that neutralize the pains of our existence, to keep those nutrients flowing, the nutrients that soften the sadness of our existence and that keep us joined or held in our existence. We neutralize the poison by putting something good into the pot. We all need these continuing good nutrients to keep us alive, to neutralize the poisons, to keep us aware that there are certain things very close to us that can heal us, that will neutralize those poisons and join our broken bits again. So 7 ways to avoid depression. Here they are. 1, develop a sense of harmony in yourself. We here in this place do sound that note again and again. Here on Sunday morning, out there in Mingary or in the gardens or in the artworks, wherever. The harmony in ourselves. Harmony. H+ harmony. Number 2, find ways to keep alive a good sense of self so that you have that strength in yourself to be able to cope with, to see those stresses and cope with them. Sustain good self-energy. Yes, otherwise the moods take over, you see. So neutralize the negative moods, sustain good self-energy. 4, fence. Remember fence. Fence off. Fence off the negatives. Fence off the bad memories. Bring in a positive fantasy of the future. The enrichment of the fantasy of the future. That was number 4. Number 5, look for good, supportive influences, good, supportive people somewhere. If not in real life as you meet, then in the people that you imagine or the people that you read about. Good, supportive influences. Number 5. Number 6, remember it's possible to release the healing powers of the brain. And number 7. What was number 7? Sustain comforts. Sustain contacts with the comforts and soothers and stimulations of life. Sustain contact with the good comforts, consolations, and stimulants of life. Avoid your depression. Would you please stand? And he said, when you pray, you can say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And the blessing. May the God you see in all the colours of creation arouse in you a sense of awe and wonder. May the God who is a sacred presence be real to you. May the God who is a source of inspiration and courage keep calling you forwards. May your God go with you and bless you today and always.